Okay, before I jump in, I just want to offer a little bit of clarification. There's been, I think, a little bit of confusion over the butterfly in the top left-hand corner of my screen. I added that butterfly about 2 weeks ago now. And the reason for that butterfly is as a memorial to Phoebe Bishop. This is a case that I've covered. This is a young girl from Queensland in Australia who went missing on the 15th of May, and her remains were found 2 weeks ago. But there's going to be delays in terms of her remains being released back to the family due to the complexity of the forensic side of it. It's not going to be an easy task for them to be able to discover cause of death, and they've even said that it's possible they may not be able to because of the condition of the remains. So the butterfly is up there as a kind of a tribute to Phoebe until the point in time when she is finally laid to rest. Feels like there's this sense of limbo at the moment where, even though she's been found, she's not been returned to her family yet. Now, let's go on to talking about Lily and Jack Sullivan. Now, first of all, I'm just going to draw my line in the sand here. I know there's been a bit of talk online about various people related to the family who've come forward, and I'm not talking about Belinda Gray. We know she is legitimate, and that is a legitimate interview done with CBC. I actually did a discussion on that yesterday. If you've not seen it, then jump over and have a look at that. That'll be in my Lily and Jack playlist. Now, I'm talking about the people that are supposedly cousins or uncles or who knows what else that have supposedly been talking to YouTube creators with all the dishing all the dirt and with all the information, all this background information. Well, here's what I have to say. Show me faces. Show me images of those people with any of the people involved in the case. Because too often these days now, you see people insert themselves into these cases who are just in it for a bit of attention and have absolutely no connection to the case whatsoever. We had a few, I think they were referred to as Jane Does, who came forward in the Kylie Rodney case, claiming they were at the party. Later on, it was proven that the information that they were sharing was incorrect. You look at the Madeline Soto case, and while there were some people came forward that were verified to have been friends of Stephen Stearns, then you had another person come forward claiming to be a former flatmate of Jen Soto with all the inside scoop, who had a lot of misinformation and who frequently needed to read from her notes rather than give answers from memory. Definitely a questionable witness there. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This happens now so much online. I suspect there are some YouTube creators who get their friends to help them out and ring up with information, or the ones that just completely bypass it and show you a page of notes that they've done on a computer that are apparently from an interview that they did where they gave these questions to someone and that person answered the questions and gave them back to them. So you don't even get to hear a voice. And it's like, you're right. So I'm not going to discuss any so-called cousins or uncles or any supposed text messages from Malaya, anything that cannot be independently verified. It is too easy to create fake text messages. It is too easy to basically go through, and what I've seen so often is usually these fakes have gotten information from the case, information that's publicly available, and they come back and they just basically reword the public information. Or they listen to gossip and they come back and they share the gossip as, like, real facts. So, yeah, you're not getting any of that on here. I will only share verified information or solid interviews, as in interviews where the person is on camera, you can see their face, and we know there is a way that we can verify it independent of the source that's saying, here's an interview. If I can't verify something independently, then you're not going to have it here on this channel. So this one we can verify. Obviously it has Daniel Martell on it doing yet another interview. This time it's a sit-down interview with CBC News. So I thought this was a really important one to have a look at. Honestly, I can't believe how much this guy is talking. That said, it's really not a bad thing for us that he is continuing to talk. I know he believes that he is controlling the story here. He believes that people are believing him. And look, to be honest, I do see a lot of comments online of Daniel followers. There is definitely a belief by many people out there that, well, because he's saying all this stuff on camera, he must be innocent and he must be telling the truth. I've discussed my thoughts on this in other videos, but someone putting themselves out front and centre, giving endless interviews, doesn't prove innocence. Now, in terms of how I'm going to tackle this interview, I know with several Daniel Martell interviews, I have focused a bit on body language and then also on what's been said. What I am going to do here is mostly focus on speech. However, if there is something that really stands out for me, I'm going to point it out. Because one thing I've noticed with Daniel Martell is that he controls his body language. Instead of seeing where a normal person has so many non-verbal cues while they are talking, he, on the other hand, seems to have very few non-verbal cues. He seems to be very good at hiding or trying to hide any sort of body language that may normally occur. To me, that's actually a bit of a red flag. But let's see what it looks like in this interview. In this interview, because he is seated, we get to see a full body shot of him for most of it, I believe. I actually haven't watched it yet, but at the start you definitely do see the full body shot. Hopefully this is the way it continues, because that is very useful when having a look at an individual. Now, I'm going to state my position before I begin. This is partly me being transparent, but also this is my way of reminding myself to be careful not to let any biases take over. Because currently, my take on Daniel Martell is that I have seen so many red flags so far in interviews. I have seen irregularities in statements, and there have been things that have been said that have certainly caused me to raise my eyebrows a little bit. So I'm going into this interview as a cynic. I'm yet to be convinced that Daniel is innocent and has nothing to do with the disappearance of these children. Although I'm also going into it with a logical perspective. It seems almost impossible for these children to have just wandered off into the woods. I do believe what Belinda Gray said in her interview that we looked at yesterday, that just the way the woods are, they're too dense and the kids aren't likely to have gone far. I also find it extremely significant that the Mounties came out really early in the piece and said that there was no sign of any abductions, and they did not believe that that was the case. I'm also very much aware of the irregularities in statements made by Malaya and Daniel. And while I know that there are some people who somehow try to explain that as, well, Daniel knows nothing and it's Malaya who's guilty as, and she's lying and this is why, that just doesn't make any sense. Because clearly both of them are in the know. Either both of them are lying, or they somehow were in alternate realities at the time that the children went missing. Anyway, I'm sure there'll be more of this kind of thing that comes up as we go through this interview. So I won't continue on with my discussion of that. I will instead jump into the interview. Now, before I do, just a quick request. Please hit the like button. Help me get this video out there into the algorithm and seen by more people. So let's just jump straight in now and have a look at this interview.
I know the truth. I didn't kill Lily and Jack. I know the truth. I didn't kill Lily and Jack.
Okay then, case closed. Let's all go home. No, seriously. Okay. Well, it's not off to a good start. I'm going to say that. So I slowed it down for you so you could see exactly what I saw. So after me saying, you don't see much with his body language, what you have here is him saying, I know the truth. I didn't kill Lily and Jack. What do we see going on here though? As he's saying, I know the truth, he's shaking his head. That suggests to me that right now he's not being truthful. It's certainly not in agreement with his speech. And then he says, I didn't kill Lily and Jack. And as he says this, his head dips down. And as he says didn't kill, he closes his eyes. Or while he's saying didn't kill, his eyes are closed. Then he opens them again as he says Lily and Jack. And again, you're getting this head shake going on. But he's raising his head back as he says it, and it's kind of like a bit of a corkscrew movement. I don't know if that's significant. It's not something that I really know much about. But basically, he's raising his head, getting eye contact with the interviewer to see if she's buying his story. This is something we see so often with Daniel Martell. He will make a statement and then he will look and he will check with the person who he's doing the interview with to make sure they're buying his story. But these are significant things. The shaking of the head suggests that he's not being quite honest here in terms of what he's saying. Yes, maybe he does know the truth, but what he's telling them might not be the truth. And I'm certainly not saying that he did do that to Lily and Jack, but I think there's more to the story here. And as he says, didn't kill with his eyes closed. That is classic avoidance tactic. That is when someone is trying to be deceptive, they're trying to hide something. And, you know, they say the eyes are the window to the soul. If someone's telling you something and they close their eyes while they're telling you that, pay attention to what they are saying. Because that could be something very significant. Something where they don't want you to look in their eyes because they don't want you to see that they are perhaps being not truthful. So, and it wasn't a blink, it was his eyes were closed for 2 whole words. And as he was closing his eyes, he lowered his head. That again is an evasive thing, a body language thing. When you are being evasive, it's disconnecting with the interviewer. You don't want them to be reading you, essentially. You're putting that wall up because that bit of information that you are sharing right there, it's something that you don't want them to see, that you're being deceptive. Quite often, when you see someone closing their eyes like that and dipping their head, that is a good sign that they are probably being deceptive. So straight up, I could finish the video on that. That gives me major red flags straight away before I even hear the rest of the video. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that he did kill Lily and Jack, but there's something about that he does not want the interviewer to read in his eyes, in his face. He disconnects from that personal connection there. He's not being 100% truthful about something relating to that.
I know the truth. I didn't kill Lily and Jack.
It's been 6 weeks now since you've seen Lily and Jack. I just want to ask, how are you holding up?
It's been a long 6 weeks. I know that everybody basically in the world at this point is always wanting to know, like, what happened.
So I listened to the full section, and I've broken it up here, but I listened to the full answer that he gave here. And then I had to go back and actually listen to the question that was asked, because I thought, hang on, what actually are we talking about here? So the question was, it's been 6 weeks, how are you holding up? Now, he begins by saying, it's been a long 6 weeks. And while he's saying that, you do see this little bit of self-soothing going on with his thumb. He's rubbing his arm with his thumb. But you can also see a bit of agitation, a bit of anxiety or agitation. He raises his leg in a bit of a jitter kind of thing. So what I'm seeing here is that definitely, regardless of what the situation is, he has been somewhat stressed over this 6-week period. Or maybe he's stressed about the question. Who knows? Now, what he says next, the cadence, the flow, it's just all really stilted. He's basically trying to figure it out as he goes along. So I'm going to go back again and just repeat the question. How are you holding up? The question is, it's that internal thing, you know. How's your mental world, basically? How are you holding up physically and mentally? Well, we're not hearing anything about that just yet. Now we hear, in a slightly disjointed way, I know that everybody, basically in the world, at this point, is always wanting to know what happened. How does that fit in with how are you holding up? Well, you could say, well, that's not really relevant to how he's holding up. But this is the first thing that's come to mind with him, other than repeating her question as an answer. It's been a long 6 weeks. But here's where we're getting a bit of leakage. His brain has actually processed the how are you holding up. And it's offering an explanation for basically why it's been a long 6 weeks. And the explanation is that everybody all over the world wants to know what happened. Does that relate directly to Jack and Lily? Or does that relate directly to Daniel? It's basically a bit of leakage here. He's indicating that basically a thing of concern for him is that the whole world is focused on him. They want to know what happened to these children. I mean, essentially he's been asked the question, how are you holding up? And his brain has thrown up the first thing that is of a concern for him. It's nothing about the children, but it's about the fact that the whole world is watching and they want to know what happened to the children. It's not about him wanting to know what happened to the children. It's the whole world wanting to know what happened about the children. This to me says that he's very much aware of the attention being on him, and he's not comfortable with it at all. But it seems pretty clear from his statement that the children are not his number one concern. I just want to point something else out too, and that is that the question, how are you holding up, is one of those questions that is generally going to elicit an involuntary emotional response. It goes right to the core of someone's being. How are you coping with this nightmare situation? Straight away, it taps into the emotions. We don't see any emotional reaction here from Daniel.
It's been from sadness to anger at this point.
Okay, just a quick aside. This is like a poker game. This interviewer is really good. I noticed it when I was doing the review of the interview that she did with Belinda Gray, the grandmother, or the bio-dad's mother. But what I've noticed here is that she is totally still. She's not giving anything away with her body language, or she's not giving anything away with her speech. Now, the next thing that Daniel said is quite significant in my opinion, because he says it's been from sadness to anger at this point. What's missing from this statement? It's not an I statement. Quite often, when a person is not being truthful, you don't hear personal pronouns in what they're saying, being the I, we, whatever. Yes, for anyone who's not familiar with my channel, that is a chihuahua who snores very, very loudly. So he's not saying he's gone from sadness to anger. He's just saying it's been from sadness to anger. So we don't even have full sentences here in any way, shape or form. He's used this whole sadness to anger thing in a previous interview which we heard. Clearly to him it sounds convincing, so he's decided to stick to it, but there's no personal pronouns here whatsoever, which to me says that this is just something that he's thought up in his head, decided it sounds good, and he's run with it. He's certainly not showing any signs of anger in this interview. And if he was feeling anger over the disappearance, you would expect the next statement to be explaining that anger. I've gone from sadness to anger because it feels like they've just vanished completely and I just don't understand how that happened. Something like that. But that's not what we get.
And I know the RCMP and major crimes are working around the clock trying to piece everything together, and I'm grateful for that.
So he's gone straight to, and I know that the RCMP and major crimes are working around the clock to piece everything together, and I'm grateful for that. So that's got nothing to do with this apparent anger, because now he's expressing gratitude. Gratitude because they're working around the clock to piece everything together. A note, he's not saying here they're working around the clock to try and find Jack and Lily. He's talking about them working around the clock to piece everything together. And while he's saying all this, you're getting a lot of blinking going on. This is something that's significant to him. And to me, it seems like it is perhaps false gratitude. And the reason I say this is there's two things that make me say this. First of all, the reason I think it's false gratitude is, like I said, he's not expressing that they are working around the clock to try and find Jack and Lily, or even to figure out what happened to Jack and Lily. You don't hear Jack and Lily mentioned at all. What he says here is to piece everything together. And I didn't notice it at first amongst all the blinking, but when he says, I'm grateful, he again closes his eyes. He doesn't want the interviewer to see the truth in that statement. To me, it sounds like this over-exaggerated gratitude towards the RCMP is actually the opposite. It's a cause of anxiety for him that they are working around the clock and that they are trying to piece things together. I believe he is actually concerned that they are going to piece things together, because this statement has nothing to do with finding Jack and Lily. nothing to do with figuring out what happened to Jack and Lily so they can find Jack and Lily, but simply that they're working really hard to piece things together. That is the thing that is at the front of his mind when he's talking about the RCMP, when in fact the main thing here that he should be thinking about is their ability to find Jack and Lily, not their ability to piece things together.
But it always leaves the question, 6 weeks has gone by, and we know at this point they're not in the woods. And where are they?
Honestly, they need to go beyond using divers and get some sonar on every waterway in the area. And let me back up and explain where I'm coming from with that. So first of all, he says, but it always leaves the question, 6 weeks has gone by, and he clenches his lips after saying 6 weeks has gone by. There's something here that he's avoiding saying, something that he doesn't want to come out. And then what he does say is, and we know at this point they're not in the woods, and where are they? And he's nodding his head as he says they're not in the woods. He's pretty damn confident about that fact. And honestly, there seems to be more head movement while he's saying this than during any other part that we've heard so far. To me, he definitely seems, and it's a nod, he knows these kids aren't in the woods. Well, here's the thing. If those kids are definitely not in the woods, he wasn't told that by the Mounties. How do I know that? Because they wouldn't have come out early on in the case and said it wasn't an abduction without really good reason to say so. Meaning that unless they've doubled back and suddenly discovered something that is sign of an abduction, which I highly doubt, then if the kids aren't in the woods, the investigation is still on the 2 adults who were last with the children and on the property where the children were last reported to have been. So if he is super confident that these children aren't in the woods, he didn't hear that from the Mounties. This is coming directly from him, which is why I say they really need to be checking waterways with sonar. Because this is not the first time we've heard something like this. At one point in time, he was talking about something, and he referred to diving in to something, which was an odd way of phrasing it. We also have him talking about, at the very beginning of the case, he was running through waist-deep water. And this mention of, well, Lily's backpack was white, but by now it's probably muddy. The other thing that I find interesting with what he's saying here is that, to me, it sounds like a recitation. It doesn't sound like someone expressing a question, expressing curiosity. It sounds like someone just reciting something that is in their head and they want to just get it out. Or someone reciting a practiced speech. At the end of it, when he says, and where are they? Doesn't sound like a question to me. Sounds like it's just the natural progression of, well, they're not in the woods, well, where are they? And I didn't manage to do it quite the way I was intended to there. But it wasn't intended as it was more of a rhetorical question. Wasn't expecting an answer, because I believe he knows where they are.
Did you feel in the beginning that they suspected you?
Of course. The stepfather was always a prime suspect right off the beginning.
You felt that from the beginning?
Yeah.
But you don't feel that now?
No, I don't feel that at all.
Now, this is quite an interesting choice of questions she's used here. Did you feel in the beginning that they suspected you? And of course he answers with, of course, the stepfather is always the prime suspect, right after the beginning. There's an odd way of saying it, right after the beginning. But note, he's using minimising language here. He's not directly saying, you know, of course, because of how they reacted to me or something like that. He just gives a very general statement. Well, of course, because the stepfather is always the prime suspect. So it wasn't anything to do with him. It was just instead, well, this is a matter of course. Trying to minimise the fact that the investigation was looking at him, and hopefully still is looking at him. He wants to give the impression that this is the only reason they looked at him at the beginning, simply because it's standard practice to look at the stepfather first. And I know someone got horribly upset with me for saying this in the past, but him and Malaya were boyfriend and girlfriend. He wasn't stepfather. They weren't married. Yeah, they had a child together. But, you know, it was a short relationship. And, yeah, sorry, but in my world, stepfather means you have made that long-term commitment, meaning that you are engaged or you are married, not just that you're shacked up together. Now, as I mentioned, she's got an interesting way of questioning him here. First of all, she starts with, so you felt at the beginning that they suspected you. And now she moves on to, but you don't feel that now. And his response is, no, I don't feel that at all. But as he's saying that, his body language is telling us an entirely different story. Again, you're seeing the self-soothing happening with the thumb. But it seems like the muscles in that same arm seem to tighten a little bit at the same time. I suspect that what we're seeing here is a bit of false bravado for the purpose of convincing the audience that he's innocent. I mean, the intention here is extremely clear. That is to convince the audience that since he is super confident, that it must be the truth. He doesn't feel that at all. So, no, it doesn't seem like the Mounties are looking at him anymore with regards to this investigation. Or that's what he would have the audience believe. Don't forget that at this point in time, investigators have said we are not taking anything off the table right now.
I asked for the lie detector exam, the polygraph exam. I gave them my phone. I told them I do drug tests because there's a lot of rumors online about a drug party.
So this guy's a hero, right? Just because of how helpful he's been with detectives. He volunteered to do a polygraph test. He gave them his phone. And he even volunteered to do a drug test. Let's break all this down. First of all, let's talk about the polygraph test. It's interesting the way that he starts referring to it as a lie detector exam and then changes it to calling it a polygraph exam. And he refers to it as an exam, not just a test. When I think exams, I think back to when I did my first university degree, and for who knows how many years afterwards, when every October, because that's exam time here in Australia, I would have nightmares about exams. Even after I had completed my degree, I would still have nightmares about exams. Things like sitting outside the exam room waiting and suddenly discovering that I'd actually studied all the wrong things because that's what everyone around me was telling me. Or getting in the exam and not being able to read the paper. And, exams are a cause of considerable stress, is what I'm saying here. Tests, yeah, cause for anxiety, not quite so stressful. So him referring to it as an exam, to me, suggests a heightened level of stress over doing this polygraph test. Now, let's be realistic here. Investigators don't just do polygraph tests because you ask them to. There's quite an amount of time involved because there's an interview that's done beforehand that's going to be anywhere upwards of 3-4 hours. And that's where they establish the questions that they're going to ask. Then you've got to set up all the equipment. Time-wise, this is costly. You're paying a specialist to do so. And of course, time-wise, why are you going to bother administering a polygraph test with someone who is not a suspect? Maybe he volunteered and said, "Oh, I'll do a polygraph test." But I would say that the only reason for them doing a polygraph test would have been because he was earmarked for one in the first place. So let's not forget that. The fact that he corrects himself from a lie detector exam to a polygraph exam says to me that the main focus here for him is that this test is being administered to see if he is lying. In other words, lies are at the forefront of his mind here. And we know he's said in the past that the reason he wanted to do a polygraph test was because of all the things that were being said about him online. What's the thing here? The deal here is that the focus about doing a polygraph test has never really been about Lily and Jack. It's been about him trying to prove to people online that he's not lying. But you never hear him outright say that he's not lying. You never hear him outright say that he's telling the truth or that he had nothing to do with their disappearance. I think, too, another significant thing about him changing from referring to it as a lie detector exam to a polygraph exam is that subconsciously his mind is wanting to take the focus away from the word lie. He doesn't want to refer to it as a lie detector exam because he's been working so hard over the last 6-7 weeks to convince people he's not lying. So for him, the word lie is loaded. Most people, if they were to just slip up and call it a lie detector test, wouldn't really care because it is an alternate name for it. But for him, it's something he has to correct because he doesn't want to give the impression that he may have lied. His brain sees the logic in that, doesn't realise that it's kind of giving him away a bit here. He also refers to giving them his phone. But in another interview quite recently, he actually specifically said that they had seized his and Malaya's phones. So he's actually changed the story a bit here. Sounds better if you say you voluntarily offered to give them your phone as opposed to what is standard protocol anyway with an investigation, them requesting your phone as part of the investigation. And let's be real, regardless of if these guys were innocent or not, if detectives were doing their job properly, of course they would have requested their phones so they could do a download. But by flipping the narrative here and saying he gave them his phone, giving the impression that it was his idea and he handed it over because he's just a good guy and he wants to help the investigation and all that sort of stuff, that is intentional manipulation. Why would someone need to intentionally manipulate their audience if they've got nothing to hide? Finally, we have the drug test. I told them do a drug test because there's a lot of rumours online about a drug party. So again, he's more concerned with public perception than with anything that's actually going to help find Jack and Lily. He wants to be able to tell all these people online that, hey, I did a drug test, it came up clean, there was no drug party. Now, what was going on while he was saying all these things? This is really significant for me. Excessive blinking, for starters. But not only that, so much eye movement. His eyes were darting from side to side. This guy was showing a heightened level of anxiety while he was saying all this. If this was just standard protocol, you volunteered all these things just to help the investigation, get things moving away from you and along to what really happened, you wouldn't see all these signs of anxiety for him. And yet you have excessive blinking and you have these rapid eye movements left to right while he's saying it. This is all a cause of extreme anxiety for him. Now, the last thing I wanted to comment on is when he talks about there being rumours of an online drug party, you see one eyebrow raised. this is something that is a cause of considerable disdain for him. That raised eyebrow is showing contempt. Contempt for those rumours about the drug party. That to me suggests that, in actual fact, in all honesty, there wasn't any party, and that he is being truthful here. Because clearly, for him, this is a cause of contempt. How dare they accuse me of partaking in this fictional drug party? It never happened. And to be honest, I actually do see him and Malaya as being somewhat insular people. Not the sort of people that are going to have these huge, wild, big parties at their house, but more they're just going to hang at home with their kids. Now, I mentioned in my previous Jack and Lily video that I'd shared with members some excerpts of videos of Malaya when she was 14 and 16, which gives a pretty clear picture of her as being a somewhat, I guess, innocent, quiet kind of individual, possibly a little bit naive. I had not planned on sharing them publicly because it feels like a bit of an invasion of Malaya's privacy, although I am contemplating sharing excerpts in my next video because I want to, in my next video, discuss the absurd story that's going around about Malaya running off with the children and why I think that is absurd and, well, just why it's just a load of BS, basically. I may use those videos then, but if you've seen those videos, you'd understand what I'm saying here. Malaya doesn't strike me as the sort of person who's going to have huge wild parties with a whole bunch of people around. I think she is the sort of quiet, reserved person who, especially with 3 young children, is more likely to just have friends hang around. But in all honesty, I suspect that this couple was somewhat isolated from the world. But that's not what today is about in terms of this discussion. That is about, we're talking about this interview that Daniel did. I mean, sure, it's possible that Daniel showing contempt over this rumour of the party could be contempt for someone dobbing them in. But I just can't see that based on what we've learned about Daniel and Malaya in terms of personalities, and also the way he is talking about the party here. He's not showing contempt about someone commenting about a party. He's showing contempt for the rumours. He's not happy about the rumours online about there being a party. Meaning that, to me, that says that there really wasn't any sort of party at that house.
I know the person that said there's rumors, and it was just to take the heat off themselves.
Was there any kind of party?
No.
Was there any kind of gathering that someone might have thought was a party?
No.
There were no people at the house?
No. Not the night before.
Okay, there's something significant in what was said here, but I'll come back to that. So, clearly this whole rumour of big party the night before is a cause of anxiety for him. But he's telling the truth. So that makes it kind of curious. Why do I think he's telling the truth? I'll come back to that because I want to talk about this whole, the person that said the rumours first. I know the person that said the rumours and it was just to take the heat off themselves. And as he's saying to take the heat off themselves, you can see his hands starting to move, starting to fidget a bit. Well, nobody else has had the heat on them other than Daniel and Malaya. I can't see Malaya starting a rumour about a wild party, and I'm not sure how Daniel would benefit from starting a rumour about a wild party. So why is he saying this? I think what we're actually seeing here is a little bit of gaslighting an imaginary person. By saying this person is doing this to take the heat off themselves, he's suggesting that he knows who's responsible for the children going missing, and that person is the person who started the rumour about the parties. I suspect this is just pure fiction. This is something that he's decided is a good way of actually taking the heat off him. Accusing someone else of making these stories about him and Malaya. Basically saying that they're doing that because they're guilty and they want to take the heat off themselves. Possibly. There's an alternative, and I'll come back to that. So she asks him about these party rumours. There wasn't any sort of party, any gathering, no people at the house. And with each one of those questions, he says no. And with each one of those answers, his body language is agreeing. As he says no each time, he's shaking his head. And it is in sync with what he's saying. He's being truthful here. There was no party. The body language is showing us that in this instance, he's being truthful. There was no party. The shaking of the head coincides precisely with him saying no. There was no party. But then he says this odd thing at the end. After her asking him there wasn't anybody at the house, he said, not the night before. And that threw me for a moment, because when someone says that, that infers that there was someone at the house at some point in time. And why would that be significant? Well, if someone had been to the house 3 or 4 days beforehand, you're not going to throw that comment in because it's totally irrelevant. So why the not the night before? Well, this suddenly turns things on its head for me a little bit. Is it possible that there was someone at the house other than Malaya and Daniel the morning that the children went missing? And that maybe, well, we've been saying that we thought that whatever occurred goes directly back to Malaya and Daniel. What if it's got something to do with an additional person at the house? Something that person did, which resulted in the children no longer being here. Now we know that, or it appears very much that Daniel has been lying all along. It appears that he has been extremely untruthful, and for that he's been making himself look like the number one suspect. But what if him and Malaya were still in bed and someone else was at the house interacting with the children in some way, and something happened that meant that the children were no longer there? Or is this an attempt by an extremely manipulative individual to further control the narrative? Because there's so many things that I see in these interviews of Daniel that point towards him being a somewhat manipulative individual. Someone who, he doesn't say things outright, but he offers statements that people are meant to draw inferences from. So is he hoping that people will draw the inference that someone else was at the house the morning that the children went missing, and that it wasn't anything to do with him and Malaya? I'm not sure what to think here, but I certainly think that detectives should be asking Malaya and Daniel if there was someone else at the house the morning that the children went missing.
Okay, you mentioned you offered to take a polygraph test.
Yeah.
Did the RCMP take you up on that?
Yes, it did.
And how did that unfold?
That unfolded in my favor. They obviously know I wasn't lying about anything.
Okay, first of all, there's no way this guy would have beaten a polygraph test. As soon as this topic comes up, he is showing increased anxiety. This time round, she asks him, how did that unfold? And before he even speaks, he inhales and the shoulders go up. This is the first time we've actually seen any shoulder movement from him. And he says, that unfolded in my favour. And then he has this long exhale and the shoulders go down. The whole time he was saying that unfolded in my favour, you could see the tension, the raised shoulders. And again, he's shaking his head and we're starting to get a bit more eye movement. I don't think he's been told anything about how he went in this polygraph test. And I think this is a cause of anxiety for him because he hasn't been told. I suspect that the raised shoulders aren't just a byproduct of anxiety, because we've seen other instances where he's become anxious and not done that. I think they are actually indicating that he doesn't know how he did with the test. It's a shrug. He doesn't know if he passed the polygraph test. He's going to tell everyone that he did because that suits his narrative. And the other reason that makes me think this is that he then says, they obviously know I wasn't lying about anything. Adding in obviously, to me, is that's a bit more of your persuasive language. He wants to make sure that the listener is convinced that the Mounties didn't think he was lying. That they obviously know he's not lying. And the thing is, when I hear someone throw in persuasive words like obviously, that to me says that they're probably not being truthful. They are trying to manipulate the listener. They are trying to obfuscate. Of course, the fact that he's shaking his head while he's saying all that really doesn't help his case much at all. The other thing I noticed is that as he says wasn't lying about anything, again you get a raised eyebrow on lying. He feels contempt over being accused as a liar. Maybe you could argue that that means that, well, he's not lying and he's upset because people are calling him a liar. We're talking about contempt here. If someone calls you a liar and you're being truthful, you tend to feel anxious. But contempt seems to me to be taking it to a whole other level. Is he feeling contempt because of the number of people that are accusing him of being a liar? Or is he feeling contempt because he thought he was being convincing and he doesn't like the fact that people are seeing through his lies? Now, yes, I came into this video saying that I believe Daniel was being untruthful and that I had serious reservations about him. And maybe I'm showing a bias here. I am willing to be convinced of his innocence if there is something in his body language, in his language, to convince me. But from every interview that I've looked at with this guy, every time I go straight back to the same thing. He's being deceptive. I keep coming back to the same thing. He seems to be manipulative and he seems to be deceptive.
So they said, yep, great, thank you, come in for a polygraph test.
Yeah, it took a little while to set up. And
When did you do that test?
I don't know the exact date, but that would be at least 3 weeks ago, probably.
So roughly 3 weeks after the disappearance.
Yeah.
And I think most Canadians wouldn't have any idea what's involved with that. Can you describe the process? You go in and just tell us right from the start.
We go in, sit down in a big comfy chair, and they have multiple sensory pads. You have them underneath your forearms, you have them underneath your butt, and you have them underneath your feet with your shoes off. You have a sweat gland on one finger. You have a measuring instrument for blood flow that goes in and out of your hand, and you have a cuff on your arm for blood pressure to measure your pulse.
Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was extremely nervous. Especially with the first question they asked you, did you kill Lily and Jack?
That was the first question they asked you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So for someone who hasn't been giving much away in terms of body language, suddenly he's giving a lot away. Suddenly we are seeing some quite obvious body language going on here. First of all, he says that he was extremely nervous, and you see him nodding his head. We do get a lot of head movement from him anyway, but that is definitely in agreement with what he is saying. He was extremely nervous, clearly, about doing this polygraph test. And then the big one, which I'm sure you all saw. He says, especially with the first question they asked me, did you kill Lily and Jack? And as soon as he finishes saying it, you see him lick his lips. That is a sign of stress and tension. It's that whole dry mouth thing. This is a cause of major anxiety for him. Now, obviously, that's not a sign that he did actually do anything to Jack and Lily. It is a sign that the question itself was a cause of extreme stress for him. To me, the fact that it was a cause of extreme stress certainly makes me raise my eyebrows. If he wasn't involved, and he knows he wasn't involved, then that question's shouldn't cause any level of anxiety for him. You may have noticed also that while he was saying it, his nostrils flared out. This question over Lily and Jack is definitely a cause of stress, a cause of anxiety for him. Now, the other thing I noticed while he was saying it is that he was trying extremely hard to keep eye contact with the interviewer. He was watching very closely while he was making that statement, and when he finished the statement, then you get this long stare straight at her. He was, once again, trying to read her reaction. Now, she asks him, that was the first question they asked you, and he nods as he says, yeah. He says yes, and then he says, yeah. And when he says yeah, he says it softer, and he closes his eyes and dips his head. Now, had he not just said quite confidently, yes, then the way he does this when he repeats it and says yeah, I would interpret as displaying vulnerability. But that's totally incongruent with what we've just seen 1 second beforehand. Him going from super confident with the same answer to displaying this, what appears to be vulnerability. Is this a put on? Is this an attempt to manipulate the viewer to make them feel sympathy for him? They pan out in the shot straight after that, but you can see that after that he directly raises his head again and again goes for eye contact with the interviewer, which is his classic thing of he's basically reading the interviewer to see if it's hit home, to see if they are buying what he's selling them. We saw this exact same thing in one of the early interviews where he was being interviewed and he suddenly appeared to start crying even though there were no tears and no snot. And he looked up through his hand to judge if the interviewer was buying his act. So in all honesty, my instincts are that it was a put on. It was another attempt to manipulate the audience.
What went through your mind when someone's asking you that question so point blank like that?
Your mind has a massive release of chemicals, I guess you would call them. It's like your stress levels just astronomically through the roof, and your body doesn't know what to do because it's not every day the way you're hooked up to machines in an interrogation room where someone asks you questions like that.
Wow. So the question was, essentially, what went through your mind being asked a question like that point blank? You know, like, what were your thoughts? What was your reaction? Your physical reaction? What went through your head? I would expect something like, I was upset that they would ask me this, or I was horrified that they would think this. I was disgusted that they could even consider this. But instead what we get sounds like someone who has basically gone online and researched what happens when you are doing a polygraph test. Because what he does is he starts describing the process that may occur on a physiological level, but from a more of a scientific perspective. He's not saying, well, I felt sick, or I felt this pain in my stomach because I felt like they'd just ripped my guts out by asking such a horrible question. No, we're going to go with the whole physiological description. You know, your mind has a massive release of chemicals, and you get this slight grin before he says chemicals. Okay. I guess you would call them, and then he can't really come up with the rest of it. I guess he's probably forgotten what they are called. But without realising he's doing it, he's giving himself away really badly here. And showing that the question itself was a cause of extreme anxiety for him. And we already know that from his body language when he discussed it. But now he's describing the physiological effect that occurs when you are asked questions doing a polygraph, but in an attempt to actually avoid answering and say what actually went through his mind, instead he's described what occurs when someone is extremely stressed out or anxious when asked a question, which, you know, to me suggests guilt. Because if someone asks you point blank if you had done something like that, and you know that you didn't do it, and you know that you are innocent, then you're not going to feel anxiety. You're not going to have this massive physiological reaction like he's describing right here. This tells me that it seems quite likely that he did have something to do with whatever occurred to Jack and Lily. And I mean, he can't even give you a full sentence here describing the reaction. He's like, you get a pause and the eyes start to dart a bit. It's really like your stress levels just, and astronomically through the roof, and your body doesn't know what to do. That is deer in headlight panic. So while it appears that he's not answering her question, he has essentially said that when he was asked that question, he became extremely anxious to the point of panic. And you see his knee jiggling a little bit, and you once again see him clenching his hands. Honestly, right now this guy is definitely not convincing me of his innocence.
What other kinds of questions did they ask you?
All the questions pertain to the death of Lily and Jack. Are you accessory to the murder of Lily and Jack? They were all.
Okay, huge red flags for me yet again. So she asks what were the other questions. And straight up he says, the questions pertaining to the death of Lily and Jack. Okay. Why is this a red flag to me? Because there's no referencing here to any sort of probability. It is a definitive statement. The death of Lily and Jack. The way he's said this establishes that this has occurred. They are deceased. The questions aren't about a hypothetical to him. They are about a real event. The death of Lily and Jack. This is solid and tangible. He's not talking about the possibility of the death, but the death, the actual event that occurred. Could be asking questions about the car that you drove to the interview in. That is a specific car. That is not a hypothetical. That is not a possibility. That is the car. In relating what occurred in this polygraph test, it appears that Daniel could well be giving us some major truths here. One of these truths being that Jack and Lily are no longer alive, and that he knows this as a fact. He then adds in, they asked him, are you an accessory to the death of Lily and Jack? And again, we have excessive blinking going on. I truly believe this guy knows what happened to these children.
So all of the questions assumed that the children are no longer alive.
Yeah.
There were no questions at all about, did you take them somewhere?
No.
Could they be somewhere?
No.
Without necessarily intending to, I think he's given us, in that short statement, more information on the direction of the investigation than the Mounties have themselves. They believe that somebody close to those children is responsible for their deaths. It appears that they are certain that the children are no longer alive, and it appears that this is definitely a criminal investigation. Don't forget also, in their most recent release, the Mounties did mention that they were using statement analysts and behaviourists. They are looking very, very closely at the people closest to these children.
The police have done a number of polygraph tests. They've done 53 formal interviews. Do you know who these people are?
Yeah.
That's a lot of interviews.
It is a lot of interviews. A lot of them are my family, people that live in the area. And those interviews, typically my interview was 4 hours. And a lot of the interviews from my family were 1-2 hours. So there's a lot of time taken up and they ask detailed questions.
And again, for him, the interviewing process is a cause of anxiety. He mentions that his interview took 4 hours, and you see him lick his lip again. Obviously, the whole interviewing process is a cause of considerable anxiety for him. I wonder if this is something that they will take advantage of and pull him in for more interviews to see if they can push him to the point with his anxiety where he may offer up some more information. Now he goes on to talk about his family members being interviewed for a few hours each. And what's quite interesting there is that he mentions that it took up a lot of time, and then as he says they asked detailed questions, you see his lip curl up on one side, showing contempt. There's something about them asking detailed questions of family members that he doesn't like. And this statement, there's a lot of time taken up. That has shades of criticism to it. You're taking up a lot of my time. You're wasting my time. The wording of it suggests that he doesn't approve of them taking up time on questioning. Now, if you were really concerned about these children being found and about finding out any information that might lead to their whereabouts, you're not going to be concerned about how much time is taken up with the questioning. You might say they've dedicated a lot of time to questioning, or they've been really thorough with their questioning, but not taken up a lot of time. This is not the words of someone who is supportive of an investigation that is focused around bringing these children home that he claims that he cares so much about.
Do you know who else actually took a polygraph test?
I mean, I do, but I'm not going to say anything that's going to impede the investigation.
Okay, first up, the body language here is not in sync with the speech. He's not concerned in terms of saying who's done a polygraph test, that may impede the investigation. I think here he's trying to infer that Malaya has done a polygraph test, but that the investigation is focused on her, and that's why he's not going to tell them. So, again, seems like he is trying to manipulate the viewer, the listener, into looking away from him and directly at Malaya. The biggest thing that stood out for me in terms of the inconsistencies is that when he's saying doesn't want to impede the investigation, he nods before saying it instead of while he's saying it. If he was genuine there, then you would expect the nod to basically coincide with what he was saying. But it didn't. He was completely out of sync with his language and his body language. So there's definitely some form of deception going on here with that statement.
Okay. When did you find out the result of your test?
Immediately right after.
What did they say to you?
You did a good job, you passed.
And how did...
You did a good job, you passed.
And how did...
Okay, right now I am very conscious of the power of what I say. So I'm just going to point out that this is my observation. I am not saying that this is necessarily 100% correct. I am sharing my opinion. But I got some really bad vibes just then. So, we've heard him say this in interviews before, that they told him he did a good job and that he passed. What he's also saying here is that he was given the results immediately upon finishing. Now, it's my understanding that what actually happens is that they may give you a printout showing basically your results from a polygraph test. But I doubt very much that they would have sat there and said, yeah, you did good, you passed. And that's backed up by his body language. He says, you did a good job. And as he starts saying that, he shakes his head. And then he does get this enormous smile on his face when he says, you passed. But at the same time, he raises one of his eyebrows. Only one. We're getting this asymmetrical stuff going on here. Is he being deceptive here? Is he showing contempt? There's certainly more to the story here than him saying he passed. And the thing that I find a little bit disturbing is what I saw after he said he passed. Because the smile suddenly vanishes and you see his nostrils flare out, his lips curl down just a little bit, he tilts his head up and you get this kind of one-sided smirk. And at the same time, he's staring like he's looking straight through her. Honestly, I saw that and it just sent a chill down my spine. And like I said, I'm sharing my opinion here. But the word that comes to mind from seeing that sudden change in his expression is malevolence.
How'd that feel?
Good.
And then you get what appears to be an honest answer here. She says, how did that make you feel? And he says, good. And you get a smile as he's saying it. So that it's a little bit unusual that we get this initial reaction that I just described. And then she's like, and how does this make you feel? And he's like, good. Because I still doubt very much that they actually told him that he passed. Maybe the reaction here comes from a belief that he passed.
And did you feel that there was any further suspicion on you after that point, or was that sort of conclusive?
No, that was really when I seen the turning point for it starting to taper off with investigators.
So she asked him if he felt there was further suspicion after that point. Now, I've mentioned this in past videos, but I will mention it here. The brain doesn't like to lie, and one of the things it'll do to you when you are attempting to say something that is perhaps less than truthful is that it will make it hard for you to get that sentence out. And what we're seeing from him is a struggle here to finish what he's saying. He says, no, that was really... And he clenches his lips, which is also a sign of someone trying to avoid being untruthful. To me, that is a sign of pay attention to what they're going to say next, because it's probably not quite 100% truthful. And he says, when I saw the turning point for, and then he pauses again, starting to taper off with investigations. That's a lot of words and a lot of incomplete sentences for someone who is attempting to say that they don't think there's any more suspicion on him. Which to me suggests that he still thinks they are looking closely at him. Now, maybe at this point in time, with him having done a poly test, the detectives are sitting back and aren't in a hurry to interview him again. Although he did say starting to taper off, meaning that wasn't the last time that he was interviewed or asked any questions. Just means that it's occurred less frequently, according to him, since he did the polygraph test. Starting to taper off is very, very different from completely stopping. So that to me says that in actual fact they are still looking at him, but I suspect that they have a strategy right now which probably involves less time spent questioning him, more focus on something else to do with the investigation. Now, I'm going to stop here for now and come back with a part 2 for this, because this is already an hour and a half long and there's still quite a bit to go there's seems to have just been so much to unpack so far. Of course, the other side of it is too that given the discussion in this portion of the interview, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to be demonetised. So maybe if I split it into 2 parts, maybe at least part 2 might actually be monetised, and I'm not going to go under completely with trying to maintain a channel that is earning no money. Now, on that note, while it does feel a little bit awkward bringing it up, I'm going to do so because right now I am really struggling with demonetisation of my videos and also with shadow banning of my videos, meaning that I'm currently not getting the usual number of views. And a lot of the time when I get the views, my videos have been demonetised by YouTube anyway. So I am going to mention the Buy Me a Coffee account that I have in the description for this video and also on the homepage for my channel. Any support that way is greatly appreciated, and a huge thank you to those people who have been buying me coffees over the last week or so. Your support has just meant so much to me. It is so discouraging when you put in hours and hours of work into a channel and you see that line on the graph just going down, showing you that you're not earning anything. So thank you for all those people who have been supporting me with Buy Me a Coffee. It is greatly appreciated. Now, if you are new to my channel, you can support me by subscribing to my channel. And the biggest way everyone can support me, which will get my videos out there into the algorithm, get them seen by more people, and hopefully get my channel moving back in a positive direction, you can help me out by hitting the like button. That's going to make a huge, huge difference to my channel, and also by leaving a comment below. So on that note, thank you, and I will catch you in the next one.
I've been to wonder